presented by Vyas Media Network.
What I believe is the world is changing so fast now, more than from what we've come from the 19th century till today. I believe in the next 20 years, we don't even know what the society is going to be like.
Correct.
We don't even know what organizations are going to require. So how do we structure our school systems in a way to prepare the child for 2 decades from now, where we don't even know what is going to happen? And just the way chips and technology and computers are expanding, it is even the society is evolving at that rate.
I think to meet the needs of a society that is going to be so rapidly expanding and modifying itself, one of the things that we really need to focus on is who are the ones who are teaching the ones who are getting taught.
Right.
Right? So the teachers are at the center of this entire school system, because an organizational vision, whenever an entrepreneur gives birth to a school, he or she might have a vision of improving livelihoods of teaching staff, who come to work in the organization. And I think the greater impact is felt by the entrepreneur to change lives of people, apart from, of course, making profits, because it should be a profitable industry.
Right.
Now, if a teacher who is teaching a grade 6 or a grade 7 or a engineering student currently in 2024 has been educated and has not modified his or her education in the boxed framework that you just mentioned, his or her learning, the teacher could have learned 20 or 30 years ago. And if that learning is steadfast, has not been modified to a large extent, and I'm not just talking about professional development trainings, they serve a very narrow need of what strategies you might implement in the classroom. I think as much as I have experienced, when a person becomes a tutor or a teacher, he or she stops learning. He or she stops reading books. He or she stops researching to the larger extent. I cannot say for sure that every teacher does that, because I know teachers who are researching and learning and growing every single day of their lives. I've met a lot of them. But the larger majority that I have personally worked with are satisfied with a salary structure,
Right.
with a 8 to 4 job, and then have a personal life at home.
Right.
Which is not incorrect, because their family ambitions could be different. But I think when you're tutoring minds, your greater ambition or goal or aim cannot be just a 8 to 4 job. It can be the 8 to 4 timeline. However, the vision in the mind is that I'm impacting the lives of students. Whatever I'm going to teach today or in 10 years' time, if I'm not abreast of what is evolving in the world outside, then I am dragging their learning back. I mean, there is so much information outside of the classroom, and I'm giving limited scope and knowledge to these children. And that's, I think, is sin, almost.
Yeah.
Because the child goes out and is exposed to thousands of and tons of information, video sites and audio sites, and he or she is experimenting all the while. And then next day you come to school, you come to a box and a structure and limited information. How worthy is that of the modern world? So how can we open the minds of the teachers? How can we open up, not just the physical classroom, I'm sure we cannot open up physical classrooms, but the mindset that exists within a classroom is where I think investment needs to go into. So we need to invest in if we are to raise doctors who are not just prescribed by medicine textbooks, whatever is taught, but functional doctors, then the mindset shift needs to happen at school. Because once you're in medical school in 24, 25 years of age, then you're already operating at a fixed mindset. You already have a baggage of experiences. To change a mindset then, it takes years. But to modify a mindset at school, it can happen very quickly over time. So I think the investment of training the teachers and expanding the mindset of a classroom, if one could think of a school as a classroom, that is where the investment should go into, I feel.
That brings me to so many questions. So first is, how do we incentivize teachers to do that? Because generally when I meet teachers, they have such exhausting days and they have such exhausting jobs that they're just going from one day to the next. And even the space for them to learn or even invest in learning or have that attitude or mindset to learn more every day, to expose themselves to a lot more every day. How do we incentivize that for teachers in the first place?
I'm going to answer your question, but I know and you know that that's not going to happen in the next 20 years.
But why? Why not? Okay, let's take a hypothetical answer.
So I think 4-week class days is the best answer.
Okay, that's an interesting concept.
Right?
Yeah.
You start school at 8 o'clock in the morning. You end school at 2 o'clock for students. And then teachers invest in learning and professional development and going outside of the school premises and learning. You can have two types of professional development scenarios. One is where subject experts come to the school community and train teachers. But it's not just one-day training we're talking about. If schools, and I firmly believe that schools can be centers of community impact and learning, because the school can be a world where either people can come into or students can go out and learn. Both can happen. Then the school structure day needs to be thought of first, which means if that is the case, then the parental framework of office and home and what the child is going to do after school is a question then.
Okay.
So where does the child go from after school? Either there has to be a set of professionals taking care of the children when not inside of the structured classroom framework, because then they're free to do whatever they like. And to control 500, 600 children in doing whatever they like is, talking about next to impossible. So you have to either send them back home.
Parents would go crazy.
Because they have their own jobs to take care of. Otherwise, if you're planning to run an 8 to 4 school and teachers are taking at least 4 or 5 lessons per day, which many schools do, or a minimum of 3, then there is very little scope of the teacher learning, because then the daily cycle repeats itself, as in taking 3 classes, preparing the lesson plan for those classes, taking assessments, marking notebooks, marking assessments, taking continuous tests, engaging in teacher feedback, student feedback, parental communication, professional development sessions at school. This cycle over and over and over is exhausting. And the teachers do end up exhausted, and then there is no larger life goal left. Then it becomes a job, and if the job is well paid, they would do it with interest and vigor and energy and effort. And if the job is not well paid, which is not in most of the schools in the country, in Nepal, in Nepal's context, then they take it as a job that I'm here to teach, I'm here to correct some papers, I look into student discipline, and then I go home and then I have life of my own.
Yeah, I believe it's not just in Nepal's context, it is globally in majority of the schools.
Right. So I was talking to a colleague of mine, and he was talking about the Norwegian system, where you are expected to work at home, but your class hours are very limited. Student strengths are very limited. One, you have to reduce student strength. So we're talking about this hypothetical scenario, right? So in a class, there cannot be, there has to be a limited number of students. Because to invest in each student and to make them grow holistically, where you're looking into their academics, you're looking into their socio-emotional well-being, how the child has come from home, how the child is feeling at school, and then to grow that, identify and grow the child's extracurricular potential or co-curricular potential, a teacher has to invest a lot of time and effort and energy. And then all of these have to be documented and then presented to the school administration for thought. And then the structures go on to exist of what are the specialists the school can invest in, what kind of programs the schools can invest in to grow the children holistically. So when I hear the term holistic development, and I've used it a lot of times, I think at a certain point of time I'm not telling the truth, because we're not developing children holistically. We are just taking care of one small part of what can be or could be holistic development. So why it is not practical is because student strength has to go down drastically in our current classrooms. Teachers have to be extremely well trained, not just textbook-wise, but life-wise. Subject teaching has to be replaced with content knowledge and expert interaction, which requires time, effort, and energy and learning, continuous learning. And then the framework of children having fun at school. fun while structured learning happens. It's almost utopian.
Yeah, I have all sorts of solutions coming in my head right now, but it is not that hypothetical because there is actually a school called Alpha School running in Austin, where they run the school 2 hours a day only.
Okay. Wow.
And rest of the day, so 2 hours a day is only academic learning, and rest of the day is left for students to explore all these other areas that you're talking about, whether it is to explore the world or whether to explore what subject they're interested in and what is happening out there. And the purpose of teachers is only to guide them. So the teachers are not really teaching the children anything. They are just present in the classrooms. And let's say a child gets stuck somewhere, the teacher is there to morally support the child. The teacher is there to motivate the child. The teacher is there to guide or show the child the way. And this also solves the problem of the teachers being updated, because some individuals can have that attitude of, I want to learn all my life. But it is not necessary that everyone has that attitude or all teachers will have that attitude.
Correct.
So what this school does is it uses AI to teach children. So the classrooms, all the educative stuff, academic stuff is all taught via AIs.
Right.
And the teacher is only there for emotional guidance.
Right.
And after that 2 hours of learning via AI, the children are left to explore multiple dimensions of what they have learned, whether they want to experiment on it, whether they want to open their own small businesses, and then the teachers are supporting through that.
Amazing.
So this way the teachers don't have to keep striving to be, they don't have to commit that much time to over-educate themselves.
Right.
Because the AIs do that.
Right.
But they can do what they do best for the children.
Right. Right.
So,
Amazing. I mean, thank you for shattering that belief that it is hypothetical. And if it is happening, then that's amazing. I think the context of artificial intelligence is so crucial right now because we are now, I think, centered in terms of how to negate the ill effects of AI or generative AI.
Right.
So the large language models have shown us that we can produce text, we can dig up answers, we can do any sorts of thing. We can even develop lesson plans. The teachers don't need to really work on lesson planning now because all that can be done by generative AI. The students need not really, if they have access to artificial intelligence and tools, they will get all the answers. They don't need to really recall.
Right.
So that places a crucial focus on something, remembrance. Memory. How do children develop memory? How do you sharpen memory skills? But we'll come back to that later, but then what stemmed out of your conversation, what interesting fact stemmed out is the fact that if the so-called mundane aspects of teaching, content teaching can be taken over by machines, if that tool can teach and correct and assess, then the human mind is now open to, and the human body is now adept to exploring so much more at the school structure existing today. Right. So the teachers don't remain teachers, as you said, they do the guiding part, they do the mentoring part, which I think taps into their higher order thinking, which opens up their minds to larger possibilities.
Right. Also gives them the space and energy to now explore.
Correct.
Explore more. And there's one major factor that is missing in most schools and globally is that mentors or teachers don't focus that much on the emotional well-being of the child, whether it requires motivating the child or whether it requires supporting the child, because their attention or focus is so much on just educating the child in the academic part.
Correct.
That if the child needs support in any other way, the child is in a way left behind.
Right.
And the best schools in the world miss out on these aspects.
Correct. I think that is what I've also seen at the school level. Like, we are so intent on teaching and educating and marks because that's what the demands of our consumers are.
Right.
That we fail to focus on how the children are learning in the first place and whether the children want to learn what they are being taught.
Right.
And I think the most resistance comes when you find sort of disinterest in the structured classroom framework. So naturally, children's bodies are meant to explore, investigate. They're naturally curious, and we are boxing them into a framework and saying that you should be in classroom for 45 minutes, 8 lessons or 9 lessons per day, with short toilet breaks in between, almost akin to a prison framework. But that might be a very extreme, example. But when I go to a large-size school, and nothing against them because they've done wonderful work, and I look at the endless corridors on both sides, and once you go up in the staircase, you're actually keeping them boxed in, not asking them to explore. All the exploration is happening under the guidance of 1 or 2 people whom we call experts and mentors. And then they're let loose for 10 minutes and then put inside the box again. And then structured, lunch hours and then, boxed in again. So one of the challenges, I think, I don't know, in the European context or the context of America, where much experiments have been made, and you have the capital investments, maybe in larger cities or even smaller towns and cities, with like-minded thinking people that this systemic change needs modification. That's a possibility, like the school that you mentioned. And I'm now thinking that we are sitting now here in Nepal. How much of it is possible in this country?
That's right.
How much of a modification can we make? How much of a mindset change can we induce in our parents to even try to implement this kind of a framework, where nothing is framed, nothing is structured, yet children learn? Will the society, will parents be accepting if the child at the end of the year does not get a grade? They are. I think schools and myself as an individual will be kind of very afraid of that scenario. I don't know what the child has learned. Should a child go on from grade 5 to grade 6? Should there be a grade 5 or grade 6? Or should there be just age appropriate learning? How should we frame a school? What should that structure be? In the absence of a structure, I think fear steps in because we are so structured till date.
But also now the world that is coming is so unstructured that I strongly believe that we must go into this sort of experiential setup, and we can always take inspiration from something that is already applied somewhere else. And this again reminds me, it's not that it hasn't happened before. This is how Gurukuls worked, right? There were no grades. There was no age appropriate learning as such. Of course, there might have been levels of learning, but everybody learned together. And it was never a classroom setup. They were out in the field learning whatever they needed to learn at that time. So if you look at like mythology, Mahabharata, Ramayana, if you see all of that, then if they were to be trained to be future kings, that's what they learned. They learned to be out there. They learned to fight. They learned how to shoot arrows. They learned all of that. But everything was done out there in the field. And everybody learned together. How do you think we went from that to, is it that we followed the West too much in terms of education and we started applying that way of education, or maybe the Industrial Revolution? And do you think, again, is it very hypothetical, or we could, again, step back into that form of learning, just imagining or just assuming what is this child going to face in the future, or what are the needs of this child as he grows into an adult or to face the world, and what are the things that he needs to learn? Because as we sit in classrooms, one thing definitely we are missing out on everything that you mentioned. It is boring. It is too structured for children. They have very less space to express themselves. But at the same time, they're also missing on important components like sunlight, air. And that leads to, again, killing their creativity, because it is so mundane that they don't have that space to ignite their creative cells.
I think I'll answer your question in 2 ways, in 2 parts. So what led to this kind of an education system? I think I'm no history expert, but with rapid colonization of a few major European powers or Latin American powers, they brought their system of thinking, organization to the countries that were occupied, for sure. So once you talk about our part of the world, I mean, we've been colonized by the Portuguese, the larger part of the Southeast Asian continent, by Spain, by Britain, by France. Many colonies still exist. So definitely the Western way of thinking has influenced. I mean, as you said, the Gurukul system was working perfectly for India, and Bharat, as we know, in erstwhile history. So if that portion of the world could learn and be successful, at what success? I mean, then it comes to what success is really, because the Western definition of success, structured success, maybe was not existing in our part of the world. However, if smaller fiefdoms or kingdoms were considered successful, then we were pretty successful as separate nations coexisting in harmony or disharmony, perhaps. So if education was brought into focus to create harmony and standardization, that is exactly what has happened. Standardization has its own, positive aspects, but it also has many disconnects. So once we have been structured into a system of organization and we went into the Industrial Revolution, the structured system made sure that appropriate human resource was being generated by the school system, where they learned structured subjects and they were made experts at doing certain aspects of industrial jobs. And that's how we evolved. So the evolution, the technological evolution that we see right now was made possible through structured learning, so we cannot negate the positive aspects of that. However, now that we have surpassed the Industrial Revolution, our minds and brains have opened up so much more, we're expanding so much more, that we now feel that the industrial and structured learning needs to take a backseat, and we need to create more spaces, more creative spaces for learning to happen.
Right.
And that's how I think structured evolution, anything structured or becoming unstructured should happen. Once we have mastered structure, then the destructuring can begin to happen. So I think that's where we are right now. Can we go back to where we started, to the Gurukul system? I don't know, because we are so structured now. We are so sanitized. We are living in a so disconnected world because we don't connect ourselves to the earth. It is difficult for us to go back immediately, but who can start this effort? As a society, only centers which bring in children in large numbers can. And we do not take large number of children to a football field or to a botanical garden. We take it to a school. So that if we can change the definition of what a school can be, from using artificial intelligence to teach content that is required for doing certain jobs in the future, for certain parts of the day, and then opening up for exploration, for community connection to be built. For example, taking them to rivers, learning the river system at the banks, learning about pollution, of how pollution is actually happening from households, making learning visible, and then making them take notes, coming back, reflecting. That portion has to be structured for sure. That cannot be open-ended. But the learning, the actual practicality of the learning can be open-ended. The exploration can be open-ended. But for that, we will put pressure on the existing infrastructure for sure. Let's say if every school started to think creatively and expand their horizons, then there will be an influx of children onto the streets and onto the public establishments, or even to botanical gardens or riverbanks. Now everybody suddenly wants to go out and learn outside of the school. Then the entire concept of bringing students from different parts of the city to a certain structure is now destructured, and students are kind of moving out of that structure onto the streets and onto the community framework, right? So that puts pressure onto the system. How can that be done? I don't know. How can schools be deconstructed and said, do not seat them in corridors, in classrooms? Then you have to think about space. What and how much of space can a school have? Because if it is restructured, you need ample space to move around.
Right.
If you're sitting in a table and a chair that is meant for that one child, times 20 or 30 children in a classroom, you can confine people into a space. Once you're taking out tables and chairs and say, move around, now you need larger space. And in a city like ours, where space is a premium, or in other cities around the world, where we are saying that we are sending our children for 6 to 7 hours into a safe, secure, CCTV camera equipped environment, and parents are going to work, with eyes wide shut, thinking and knowing and believing that the children are safe for those hours so that they can invest their time in productive work. That entire structure gets destabilized. And now I have to think from a very different angle as to how to manage what we know as societal structure.
This is actually the first time I heard it broken down. So showing that how complex the whole idea is, because we talk about it all the time, and then we are like, why not?
Right.
Why can't we just do this? And then, coming from you, who has been involved with schools for so many years, I think only you can think of how complex it gets when you start breaking it down.
True. So there lies the challenge. I mean, the opportunity is very tempting. It is very easy to say that let us build community connections. Let us take children out into the field. But field visits, if 100 schools in Kathmandu were thinking about field visits on a single day, imagine the buses, transportation moving around the city. Now the buses of 100 schools are not confined to the parking lot. They're out on the streets.
Right.
And they're putting pressure on the public infrastructure.
Right.
So all of this combined, the scenario is quite tempting yet terrifying at the same time.
Yeah. I believe the larger solution in a way has to be to involve a lot of these aspects within the school itself, even if it's in a small way. And then the way you mentioned, I would love to find a school that would allow me to send my child to school only 3 or 4 days in a week.
Right.
And if I could, have my child show him other stuff for the rest of the week, that would be an amazing concept, yeah.
I think that is a luxury for us educators, because what I see from the perspective of a school administration is that parents want safety, security guaranteed, because they are paying for a service, not necessarily just for educating their children.
True.
It's a school come a daycare center.
True.
So your child is put, from the moment the child boards a school bus or a school van, the parent is safe and secured, knowing that I've paid for transportation, I've paid for the child's school fee, I've paid for the child's lunch and meal facility. Until the child is dropped back home, it is the school's responsibility and not mine, or not the family's.
Yes.
We can only change so much that we're talking about once that belief set is broken. My child is always going to be my child in whichever part of the city the child is at. For you to say, I think it's very brave of you to say that I would only want my child to go to school for 3 or 4 days a week, and then the rest I want to explore life alongside. Because at this point of time, for the 12 years, at least the child is at school. If you take about 6 days a week, which most schools run, times 7 to 7.5 hours on an average, that is the disconnect that parents have with their children.
Yes. But
plus, don't forget, home task or home assignment time.
Yes.
So all of that, once a busy parent comes back home, he or she expects the child to be quietly doing tasks, reading, studying. And that is the definition of a good child, a good student, an obedient student. So we want obedience, structure, discipline everywhere we look at. At home, at our offices, at school. To unstructure, destructure all of that and say, you can do whatever you like, and I'm going to spend time with you, is precious, because the most precious commodity right now is time. If parents had time, if schools had time, if everybody had to give time to a child, we would be growing amazing individuals. But we are so, we have created structures to create, for lack of time. Because we want our motives, our personal or professional pursuits to take precedence over what our children are doing. We're just pushing them into a structure and saying, okay, for 7-8 hours, I don't need to look into my child. And once the child comes back home, 1.5 hours, he or she's going to do home tasks. So that also I can spend doing my work. So we are inherently becoming so more selfish, I think. And then when I'm going back home and doing work on my mobile or my laptop, I want the child to do his or her work. Again, selfishness steps in. So if as a parent you're saying that I want to devote 50% of my week with my child, you will be 0.01% minority, I think, as a parent.
That is very true in many ways, because you are saying 5 days or 6 days a week plus homework time. But even Saturdays and Sundays are occupied with extra classes, and a week or 10 days or 2 weeks before the vacations start,
Right.
I start getting non-stop calls
Right.
saying, what do you have? Do you have any courses or workshops going on for the vacations? And, camps, these vacation camps are one of the busiest periods at my institute at Grooming Tales.
Right.
But when I reflect on this, and I have been questioned so many times where parents are asking me that, why is your son not attending your camps? And I'm like, because I don't want to send him to to do other workshops during his holidays. I want him to be at home.
Right.
But when I have the luxury to say that, because
Correct.
when I think about it and when I reflect on it, and I see these parents coming and dropping children every day in the morning, and then going to office, and then picking their children up in the evening, and
Right.
demanding for transport, because it is even so hard for them to take out time during the holidays to even drop or pick up their children.
Correct.
So then, as you're saying, to change that to have 50% school time or 50% home time, then we have to change the whole structure of the entire organization, like you mentioned before, the
Right.
whole society,
Right.
where even workspace are not demanding so much from parents.
Correct.
So intrinsically, if you see, it is not that parents don't want to spend time with the children.
Right.
Every parent misses out on that connection time, and somewhere within they feel that, oh, I'm not spending enough time with my child. But it is just how, as a society, we've built our ways of how we want to spend time.
Correct.
And that makes me think back to the times when we lived in smaller communities and villages raised children.
Right.
And the tasks were so well distributed that men take care of these, because also the tasks were more demanding on the muscle, and men take care of these tasks of all these out
Correct.
of house tasks, and women
Correct.
take care of all in-house tasks, and
Correct.
children are literally growing up at homes
Correct.
rather than in institutes.
I had this very interesting, sorry to
Yeah.
cut in, but I was having this very interesting conversation with my wife a couple of days ago. And she was saying, you're you're so not good at household tasks. I try to, do dishes and wash clothes and stuff like that, and or mop, just to help her. And this entire conversation stemmed from feminism and
Right.
How equality in the workspace and equal pay for women. And she was like, feminists are going to kill me, but I do not go by feminist ideology that everybody should be equal.
Right.
Because men and women are built differently. Your genetics are very different from mine. You are a very different person from how I am built. And I know that I can take care of the house much better than you can. If I ask you to do the dishes, it's double trouble for me, because I'll have to check and inspect whether they have been cleaned and then do it myself. So what's the fun in that?
Right.
But I know that if you are going for professional work outside, I do not need to interfere, because you're good at that. You've already mastered that particular skill. I am very good at cleaning. Although she's an educator like me, I mean, I cannot compare at any levels with her in household work.
Right.
Not that husband and wife should compete,
Right.
but the idea stemmed on from, if we were meant to do tasks that were segregated either genetically, and I don't know with this how many feathers I would ruffle, perhaps.
But even it doesn't just have to be like from a men-woman perspective, even
Right.
individually.
Right.
Some
right.
men could be better at cooking, and some men could be better at
Exactly. There are so many women who
yeah.
don't cook well, and that's perfectly fine, because the other partner supports. Or if both are equally terrible at cooking, then there is a solution, as in a housemaid who comes and cooks probably, So I think the discussion was regarding how we are built individually to do different sets of tasks,
Right.
and how we can succeed. And we were discussing this entire, income disparity, and how feminism came into force, and how
Every woman should work.
Every woman should be able to work. They're not making use of their education. They're being, relegated to household tasks. And then it is such an exacting thing on women because now women are expected to be educated, which they should be. They have every right as men, not talking about gender. Every human being needs to be educated, whatever education means. And then you're supposed to be working. And then women are obviously better because their bodies are genetically modified to give birth to a baby, and then they are better suited to take care of the baby. Now they have to do household work because they're much better at it. Most women are genetically, again, seeing how society has evolved and how we have structured ourselves. They are also taking care of their babies much better. They can do so much better than men can. And now they're expected to, work and get equal pay, which is absolutely fine. But they're doing 3 faculties vis-a-vis men doing 1. And how is that even justifiable? So we're having this very interesting conversation the other day regarding the same.
It is quite interesting to me as well because I was having this conversation with a friend from the US and she was telling me how, at least in your part of the world, you all still have that notion that, yes, men are the bread earners and in many families, more families than not.
Right.
But whereas in my part of the world, we have to be equal bread earners, women have to be equal bread earners. But when it comes to taking care of the child or the home, because like you mentioned, as a society, or we are genetically inclined to do that better, we are still doing that much more than men. No matter how equal it is.
Correct.
So there is an additional pressure on women, and this is leading to a lot more struggles or challenges, not just with raising children, but even living together as a family.
Right. So we're just having this conversation. Is it actually fair to ask women to go to work? If the woman chooses to go to work, obviously she's more than welcome. Then there is, I think it's criminal to say that, you are educated, now don't go to work and just be at home and take care of the household.
Right.
That's unfair. But it is unfair also to imagine that you should be an equal bread earner. That's not what's supposed to be, because then men have to be equally adept at helping in household chores and responsibilities and in raising children. And I don't think men are suited to do that. Some, I don't know. I'm not an expert, but yeah, just...
Do you think if we brought about changes in this thought of line, would we be able to, again, hypothetically implement that system of a half-week school and a half-week home for children? And could we give more time to children?
I definitely think so. I definitely think so. Because once you have a stable structure at home, a stable mentor at home, who is, again, educated, not just boxed education, but knows the ways of life, and is equally, intellectually open enough to understand that all education does not and should not and cannot happen inside a boxed, structured system. And life skills, general life skills like cooking, like plumbing, like carpentry, like tying a knot or a rope, or doing small household work. That makes, I think, for a better society. In 10 years' time, if you were to reverse whatever is happening right now, and if we were to engage boys and girls who are spending 7.5 to 8 hours in school every single day, if you cut that by almost 60% and they were to invest time in helping with household work, and if that was a part of their structured or unstructured education, if the schools encouraged that, because most of the times what we hear is they don't listen to us because we're mom and dad. Once a teacher says something or a school says something, they listen.
Right.
And I cannot understand that difference, because it is up to us to instruct and to make sure that they understand and learn. How can they listen to one set of people and ignore the other set? What are we how wrongly are we instructing them? What role models are we becoming? As a father, mother, it is okay not to listen to some things, some of the instructions, but as a teacher, if it comes from a teacher, you can and should and must listen to everything. If that's the kind of mindset that children are being prepared with and prepared for, then that's absolutely incorrect. That's not proper education. But that requires a lot of role reversals, as we are discussing, right? So a teacher or a parent or an administrative head or a logistics help, what we discuss at school is everybody who works in an educational institution is an educator.
Right.
a guard is an educator because a guard has certain specific skill sets.
Right.
His or her job would be to prevent and screen entry. Now, that is an important life lesson that a child can and should learn. What are the means? What are the mechanisms? How is it by show of force, by body structure, by language that you can actually say no to people? So we often say right to consent and refusal. A guard is a perfect person to learn from, and that's where education should start from. So you should not only learn from the outside of the school community, as you're saying, certain aspects of it could be inbuilt into the school community. Many schools have cafeterias now, cafes, or where lunch is prepared, healthy meals and snacks are given. That can be an excellent way to talk about food chains, and food preservation, and food safety, nutrition, diet, and so many things.
True.
If that were to be woven into the school system, how interesting the school could be. The physical aspect of PHE classes, the physical and health education classes. School necessarily need not have expensive gym centers. We can do so much with free yogic exercises, body weight exercises, yoga, meditation, Zumba, aerobics, gymnastics. All these are free. Free in the sense that they don't require expensive equipment, expensive housing or resources, right? You just need trained manpower. For sure, that skill sets, So if these were incorporated somehow into levels and stages of learning, like however much learning a grade 1 student could have at the school cafeteria, obviously a grade 10 student would learn so much more in so much more complex patterns and systems. But if that were somehow included as a larger part of our core learning, not just the grade specific government mandated learning, then the schools could do much more. And that brings us to another question of government versus private schools. And the entire structure now, with over 35,000 schools in the country, which are public schools, and 9,500 to 10,000 schools that are privately owned, a little bit more. I'm not sure about the accurate stats. Are the government schools properly resourced?
Yeah, that brings me to another question: that shouldn't education be equal for everybody, regardless of what their financial resources are? Because every child should have the capacity to contribute to the world in their own unique ways.
Correct.
But again, we are at that point where not every child is being given that opportunity.
Correct. So that is more or less, I think, a larger political question.
Right.
And I think there are steps being taken by the current education minister. We are seeing so many changes that are happening in Kathmandu metropolitan city. Slowly, I think the other municipalities will also take a note into what's going on, and how you cannot expect transformation in a jiffy. I mean, it has to come slowly, gradually. But I'm so happy to see the current scenario that's changing for sure. I think the government of Nepal, there's nothing wrong with the curricular structure. I mean, it is fantastic. It is very progressive in nature. I think where we are lacking is in how do you distribute resources to government-funded schools, and how do teachers at government-funded schools
get trained,
right? And how they implement, and what's the larger vision? Because come to the end of it, education has to begin and end with a vision. The vision has to be that you're not just teaching them content, you are teaching them for life, you're impacting their lives. Once a teacher and an educator understands that my influence in the classroom, even if I'm dealing with 30 students in a class or 25 students in a class, or if I'm teaching across grades, I'm impacting 120 students. Whatever I say, whatever I do, whatever I wear, as a smile or clothing or my attitude, whatever I'm wearing, affects so many children on a daily basis. I think that mindset shift can change things at the micro level. Yeah. The macro level conversation has to be how funds and resources need to be distributed. And in a cash-strapped country or a developing country like ours, those are immense, I think, political challenges that need to be overcome to even talk about what you're getting at.
I believe what you said is something so powerful because the way students or children look at mentors or teachers, they have a very aspiring attitude, and anything that a mentor, like you mentioned, says, behaves, talks, shows, presents to the children is something the children take so much to heart that it can have such a domino effect in their lives for lifelong.
Correct.
And this is something when even you or I look back at it, there were so many things that maybe this one teacher said or inspired that opened up this track of like a path in my life.
Correct. Absolutely correct. I remember I got into reading a lot because of the encouragement that I got in grade 8 of creative essays that our English teacher asked us to write. And that simple task of appreciation, of encouraging us to read books, he was a very, very strict teacher. However, we all admired the passion with which he taught.
Right.
We were taught a classical literature text written by Shakespeare. And we were in awe of how that gentleman, who was, when I was in grade 9, I think he's already above 60, how he had been teaching for the last 20 years with full dedication and passion. So it's that unwavering commitment to whatever you're good at and how you are looked upon by a community of students that can profoundly impact. And I think I am whatever I am, at least most of whatever I am, is because of how the teacher sparked passion and curiosity into the world of literature, into the world of stories.
Right.
And the stories form lives, and they give power to you in so many ways that you're not even thinking. Like I go to this doctor, and the doctor tells me a story about and whilst prescribing medicine, structured medicine from textbooks, but then the story format of the conversation really motivates you and helps you become better almost. Versus a doctor who would just give you prescribed medicines with dry, drab voice and a delivery that is very doctorish. And I think the same happens inside of a classroom, or whenever you go to a designer, or whenever you go to an agency, or wherever you go to a hotel, how you talk about the context that you are in at that particular point of time, how you explain the circumstances, is what makes life experiences. And that can be taught. Storytelling can be taught. Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
And I think stories affect life of people. When you tell stories, I think they have an uncanny power of opening you up to so much more experiences. I think the challenge comes in where we again bend down to the structure of things, because it is one thing to say that all our stories and everything can be revolved and can evolve around storytelling and life experiences, but how do you bring them all into a pot which we know as learning? From there you have to delve in and say, okay, I want to take these things out. I want to learn, I want to become skilled at something, and then with those skills, I want to earn a living. Whether I do it my own, whether I open a company or an entrepreneur venture of my own, or I work for somebody else. Is my job in life to work as a school nurse, or am I working as a school nurse in impacting the health of people? Now, if that vision or the storytelling can be told right from childhood, that even if you're choosing the job of a plumber or an electrician, you're helping fix people's problems rather than repairing a pipe. It all depends upon how you put that into context in the child's mind. Then no job becomes lesser or more. Of course, jobs can vary in skill levels. With varying skill levels or professional degrees, you may or may not get equal amounts of income. That's a different scenario altogether. But if you were to think of the lower skilled or the morally, societally lower jobs, acceptable jobs, and take the example of a plumber. And I was just talking, we were having a bathroom issue with the students' washroom. And I was talking to the students of senior high school, and I was saying that a plumber comes in and helps you fix a problem, and you go back and undo all the good work that the plumber has done. Who is the plumber serving? You. So how do you look at plumbing as a profession? Is it something that you would ever aspire to be a good plumber in life? Maybe not, because you are paying a hefty school fee to become something which is society mandated higher order thinking jobs.
Right.
But the point that I was trying to make is you should have respect for everybody around you. And I think that is not covered by any kind of curriculum as such. It does not have a score. So people do not really put a subject to it or a time limit to it and devote enough respect and attention to it. Whereas subjects are given time. So how can respect be taught? How can value of labor be taught? These are larger discourses that should start at the school level,
Right.
at the family, at the school.
Right. A lot of it, in fact, when you talk about it, a lot of these life skills are not taught in school.
Right.
And it becomes a challenge because, again, like we discussed, children are spending maximum time and maximum number of days in school versus home.
Right.
And even the time that they are at home, they're either occupied doing homeworks or extra classes or, let's say, sports. So the time between a parent and child, if you compound it, it is very, very less.
Right.
And then the responsibility comes down to, okay, my child is spending maximum time in school, so maybe he should be taught a lot more in school than what he's already learning.
Right.
But this
right.
is only going to be possible if we reduce the number of hours that we are dedicating to academic learning or subjects that we think are more significant versus actual life skills which are actually significant. And we all know it in our hearts.
Right.
There would be no parent who would not agree that these life skills that we are talking about and even more of them are important because we all have already experienced it in our lives. As a parent, we've already experienced these things that I need to be emotionally resilient.
Right.
I need to learn respect. I
Right.
need to have the right attitude.
Right.
I can succeed in no job if I
Right.
don't have these life skills.
Right.
So in my heart, any parent or in their hearts, any parent know it's important. Then where is the gap where children are not ending up learning all these things? Or why are we not? Because now, even what we spoke about earlier,
Right.
where the consumer demands are different. Maybe I could be wrong, but I believe no consumer will oppose if their children start learning all these life skills in school also.
Right, right. I think the larger conversation has to be that we talk about student and parent, school and parent partnership, right?
Right.
I think the larger onus is also, as a society, collectively, we need to understand that although we are sending our children to school, that does not absolve us of the responsibility of taking our children outdoors or demonstrating through actual behavior at home or externally that everything needs to be respected around.
Right.
So when you're going into a restaurant and you're talking to a waiter or somebody who is cleaning the restroom of the hotel or the restaurant that you are at, it is through consistent demonstration of behavioral traits that you mentor a child.
Right.
Right. So it is equally the responsibility of the parent as is of a teacher.
That's very true.
The teacher cannot give the real life context because he or she is now, at least in the structure that we are at, confined inside of a classroom, which hardly moves around. That's very stable, very structured, and very, very, very unique in the school's context. But once you're saying that you take learning outside of the classroom. So, the kind of exposure that I've had with the International Baccalaureate, the IB system of learning, we have, the IB mandates that the child develop certain principles amongst the learning. Right, a child needs to be respectful. A child needs to be principled. A child needs to be a critical thinker. A child needs to be able to be a good human being. Now, these attributes, amongst others, these attributes are not being taught at the school level consciously, because we are concentrating more on subject-specific discussions and outcomes.
Right.
And the larger context of socio-emotional learning of the child or respect for the world around the child is consistently missing. There is a huge need, I feel, if there is no government-mandated course or assessment that takes care of these, then the schools individually have the liberty, I feel, to develop courses or to develop mechanisms. A course might be too much of a structure. Develop mechanisms that induce children into learning these. How? We experimented with a school that I was with previously for a long amount of time, and we were very concerned about, environmental education. Right. So we tried to experiment. We partnered with Wildlife Conservation Nepal, and we brought in experts from WCN who came to school every week to teach farming and growing one's own food in a limited capacity, framework. They also had an excellent system. This was all prior to COVID, and many things have changed after that. But they also devised a structure where experts from Wildlife Conservation Nepal and volunteers would come to school. They would spend time with the children, and they would not really teach a course or a subject, but then engage them with nature. Whatever nature was available inside the school compounds, the walled school compound. So the children would go into a small nursery. They would dig up a little bit of soil. They would plant a seedling, and they would learn to take care of it. Very important life lessons, which is there in textbooks, but the learning inside of that school, that small space, that small nursery, gave them the outlet of doing it practically inside of the school premises.
Right.
Children even went to the extent of growing their little bit of tiny salads, and their small achievement was to take that salad and to take it to the school kitchen and then eat it along with their teachers. A very simple mechanism, but very effective in making them getting connected with nature. And that can be, we experimented with waste management and collection.
Right.
So instead of the school janitors picking up waste, we would ask children to, segregate and pick up waste and say, now, think back which is biodegradable, which is not, and what kind of waste management systems would you want to institutionalize. Oftentimes, waste becomes a huge problem because we do suffer with it. So we did a unique experiment at the school setting. We asked about 1,200 children to bring 1 packet or 2 packets of plastic waste along with them. And then we gathered them in the school compound, and we asked them to throw dispose of the plastic waste at their feet. And then we asked them to move up to the school building and then look at the combined mess that 1,200 school children would have done in 1 minute of just throwing a plastic wrapper or a YY packet, whatever, a noodle packet onto the ground, or a plastic, just a random plastic packet onto the ground. What we wanted to also experiment with this is hitting the thought process. One of the things that I've seen many children do once they take their school vehicles is to eat something quickly inside the bus and then throw it outside of the window. I've seen people doing it in vehicles when they're traveling on trips. They just drink water and would just pop the water bottle out, right? That experiment kind of hit hard into the students' minds, saying that, if 1,200 children can do this, imagine 50,000 children going to, or more than that, children going to school in one day, and them creating that amount multiplied by the number, there were 1,200 children. So the amount of mess that they had created times now multiplied by so much. And then imagine all the people of Kathmandu city disposing of waste. So the proportion, the enormity of the problem then kind of came into light. And then what's the solution to aspect? So we also discussed solutions. So we decided that wherever I'm standing, a 2 square foot radius would be my clean zone.
Right.
So I would not dispose of anything over there. Okay, I would find a waste basket, or if I did not find a waste basket, I would put a wrapper or a piece of plastic into my pocket and go home and put it in a waste disposal bin. So once we did that experiment, we said, now this is what the school has taught you.
Right.
You cannot keep it to school. You have to take it back to home and implement it in your households.
And teach everybody else as well.
And teach everybody else in the house first. And then go to your community and teach it to probably to 5 houses to do the same. And that is when true impact happens. Because those 1,200 children come from all different parts of the city. Now they take that important lesson, and this is just one lesson in waste management. They go back to their households, multiply at least 3 member houses or 4 member houses, and then they go to 5 households and teach the same thing. Now, if you were to talk about real life learning, then I would consider this real life learning. And you can very well take a test or an assessment based on this. Plus some other aspects of content that they might learn in environment management or waste management. And they can write down an answer. They can perhaps draw a picture of what they did as a project. They can do a group presentation. They can go around the neighborhood, the school community or their neighborhood and present it as a presentation to houses. They can actually ask neighbors time and say, okay, we want to do a small presentation and we did a special project at school. So you're teaching them public speaking, you're teaching them communication skills. Can all this be structured in a school framework? I believe it can. It takes time and effort and energy and thought, but it can be done. And also the same thing can be assessed in pen and paper and can be given grades.
So why do you think like most schools, and this is just one subject we are talking about, this is just one aspect, and this could be multiplied into so many different concepts and integrated into so many different subjects. Why do you think more and more schools are not doing it? Is it again the lack of time or the lack of energy? Why is it that not all schools in the city and not all educators and not just one concept but are doing it across multiple concepts and multiple theories?
I think a lot of good work is happening.
Okay.
Schools have woken up. I think individuals have that passion and the dream. I believe that all educators who have started schools or are teaching have certain intrinsic goodness at heart, impact creation at heart. It's just that with lack of support, constant motivation, or lack of proper incentives, both financial or moral, or just working conditions, that kind of decreases the motivation over time.
Right.
But everybody has good intentions at heart once they come into the field of education.
Right.
So whenever there is a management fair, a STEAM fair, a science fair, a language fair, a literature fair, a math fair, an environment day being celebrated, or Buddha Jayanti being celebrated, we're talking about peace. Every aspect of life is being incorporated and inculcated into the school's ecosystem of thinking, learning, and impact creation. It is important to assess how much complexity you can put into it, how much complexity you can weave into it. Now, when I talk about complexity, it is not just about celebrating World Environment Day on June 5th. It is also consistently following up and seeing whether the school children who celebrated or who brought a plant or who planted a tree or a seedling on that particular day is consistently being monitored, is being motivated to care for that plant or that tree and not forget about June 5th being the only day where they are being consciously taking care of the environment, right? So if it is environment studies or waste management, or if it is math, or if it is literature or language, can language fairs be done at home? Of course they can. Can structure, organization, mathematics be taught at getting supplies and rationing supplies at home? Definitely it can be. There are so many concepts of math and science that can be taught at the home level. That can be directed by the teachers, by the educators, in conjunction with the parents. Now, the parent and the teaching community collaboration has to really prosper because of this. Now, this requires, as you said, a lot of commitment.
Yeah.
It requires a lot of parental commitment and support. And it requires careful planning and mentoring from the school's part.
Right. That's what I was coming to, because usually what I see with these projects is it is generally a one-time project. So even
Right.
this waste management project that you talked about, maybe the child who's involved in it at that time might be 8 or 9 or 10 or 12, it doesn't matter. But it's more of a one-time thing. And even when we talk about the Environment Day, it's like that one day where the child has sowed the seed. But it is maybe the child becomes conscious for that little while, and for that week or that month, the child might not throw the packet outside of the bus. But what I see usually happening is it is not very sustainable in the long run, because children forget about it, and especially children need constant repetition of concepts. So, and again, another hindrance to this is what is happening at home.
Right.
So if they are in the car and, the parents continue throwing packets outside of the car, because that is where it first came from, right? If as from the time they were babies, if they never saw anyone throw packets out of the car, and they always saw people carrying packets back home or throwing it in a dustbin, then they would have never learned the concept of throwing a packet outside the car.
Correct.
Because they're just imitating and learning.
Correct.
So again, when we do such things, when we intervene, I believe it is very short-lived in many cases. There might be 1% or 5% of children to whom it, really makes an impact and stays lifelong.
Right.
But otherwise, 95% of the children will just go back to their usual ways or what is being done at home.
Correct.
So what you mentioned, that educating the parent, working alongside them, repeating this process over and over again, or repeating the concept in a way of educating children.
Right.
All that is lacking. So schools are doing projects and schools are initiating, but the sustenance of it is not always there.
I think the larger conversation also comes from the expectations of what people expect out of a school.
Right.
Because the end goal, if you see, is at this point of time in our country has to be the board level examinations, which determines which college, how much marks or GPA a child gets. That determines what kind of college the child gets into, and mostly the better colleges, which have better infrastructure, better teachers, they demand better scores. And the parent says, everything is good. I mean, I understand the concept of what you're trying to do at school, but if my child is getting lost in all of this and does not focus on grades, then the ultimate goal of me or the family trying to educate and get the best education for the child is suffering in the long run. So I think this brings us to a very interesting cusp where institutes of higher education need to change their intake policy. It is not just sufficient for a good college to take in the best of students and to graduate them. They have to be open enough to take all sorts of students and say, hey, we are an open enough educational institute to mentor and groom whatever levels you have come from. If you have the correct attitude, if you have learned life skills, if you have great social skills, if you know the world around you, we are willing to teach you and to groom you better. So what is the parameter? What constitutes a good college or a good university has to take a little bit of a rethink, in my opinion.
Also, I believe educating the parents, because a lot of parents tend to be unaware of also what their child needs or what their child... just what their child needs. Because, for example, I had a couple who came to me recently, and their child is just a baby. But they were talking about different aspects like crawling, walking, talking. And when they left after the session, they were like, we were just unaware that my child needs to crawl and not walk right now. We were just unaware. And it was very true, because they were asking me, so how are we supposed to be aware? Because from the society's side, all we hear is that your child is not talking yet. Your child is not walking yet. So how do we become aware that it's okay? My child will probably talk a month later or walk 2 months later. It's absolutely okay. And how do we make ourselves aware to simple things as my child does not need a knee pad
Right.
while crawling.
Right.
So I believe that is also lacking because everybody is an expert in their field. So even parents are experts in their field, whatever their job is and whatever their profession is.
Right.
But it is us as educators who should be responsible to educate those parents because that is what we are experts in. That is our niche.
Right.
And sometimes I feel it is too much of a pressure on parents to know everything and to do everything because parenting is never taught to them.
Correct.
So how are they supposed to be doing their jobs also, taking care of the houses also, managing everything, and then educating their children as well?
Right. I think then the broader definition of education or what to expect out of a school has to really change.
So then my question is, what is the purpose of education in a school?
I think the greater purpose of education right now, currently, as has been in the past 50, 100 years, is to produce knowledgeable people who are sector-specific experts.
And what should it be? What should the purpose of education in schools be?
It should be, I cannot deny the fact that sector-specific experts are not needed, and they have contributed to making the world what it is today. Therefore, sector-specific expertise or subject-specific knowledge alongside, we need to teach the ways of the world, which means telling stories, exploring communities, learning arts, music, culture, festivals. Because at the end of the day, that is what binds us together. When we talk about, staying in a community, a village raising our children. Forget about the concept of a village. Now we take it as a microcosm and say, okay, can it not be the incessant collaboration between parent, family, and the school?
Right.
That's a small village.
Right.
Let's take that, right?
Right.
So, if subject-specific content, as we were discussing a little while earlier, if that can be taken care of by generative AI or by technology tools that does good repetitive work and that inputs the child's minds with certain specific skill sets in terms of skills, applications, and knowledge on the basis of a curriculum that is designed, that's there, and that should be there. I feel it should not be taken away immediately because there is no need to take that away. However, the larger goal of what Earth should be or what life should be, what your emotional state is, what respect is, what values are, what attitude is. If these are not taught now, more and more children are going to be, I think, secluded from the world around them. Because it is becoming a cliche that we are living in a digital age. I mean, it is, we are. When you go to a restaurant, it's very sad to see that there is a family sitting at a table and they're all on their individual devices or worlds. So it's, if you consider that as a world, your device and you are disconnected from the people who are sitting at the same table. I know that there are many experiments, there are many families who make a conscious effort of putting their phones in the bag and talking and not looking at their phones, or even at meetings nowadays a lot of the offices have practiced that norm where your devices have to be kept outside of the meeting room and you're just about talking and conversing, because I think slowly we're losing that human connection with the world outside. So taking the limited space that we have in the city of Kathmandu right now, if the schools of Kathmandu taught content for a certain hours of the week, let's say, and devoted the rest of the hours in terms of whatever you're talking about, that school in Austin?
Yeah, Alpha School.
Alpha School in Austin, right?
Yeah.
So that requires a major shift in how human resource should be trained for and sourced for a school ecosystem. That's an entirely different ballgame, because now you're saying technology is going to teach while human teachers who are teaching is going to be a guide and a mentor, and that requires a different set of skills in terms of training.
Right. So then we have to change the way even teachers are trained or educated.
Absolutely.
And I feel even that is in that context. But I also believe even in the current context, teachers are not equipped from all angles to teach a child in many ways. They might be, with all due respect, they might be subject experts, but
Correct.
it's also very outdated.
Correct.
And again, I have more and more mentors coming and saying, I want to learn more about child development
Right.
and child behavior. And these aspects are not taught so much in teacher training.
They're not. They're not. Unfortunately, I think in our part of the world, many of us accidentally become teachers. You are not
Teacher by choice.
by choice, and that is a huge cause for concern. If you are becoming a scientist, you cannot become a scientist by accident.
Right.
You have to really study hard to be a scientist.
Right.
Now, you're not studying hard to become a teacher.
Yeah.
You know, because
a lot of people aren't.
A lot of people aren't. You know, because it has been very easy to become a teacher. You have a certain degree, and then you have minimal training, and the schools take you because you are fluent in the language that the school is teaching at.
Right.
It could be Nepali, it could be English, or it could be any other regional tongue. If you could read text, and if you had the capacity to explain that text in a little more words than that is present in the textbook, if you had the capacity to correct with correct Nepali or English or any other regional language grammar, if you had the ability to observe and monitor students, then you became a teacher. So where is the core developmental training of human psychology, how children learn and grow? We're not doing that. Teachers are not equipped for that. They're just teaching content. That's what they're good at. And as you said earlier, everybody cannot be a good mentor. You can be a good subject content expert, and you can teach content very well. But to delve into human brain, how the brain works, how you would motivate, how you would nurture and nourish a child, that's a different ballgame altogether. And we're not just trained for it.
Thinking back, there are so many things that we need to change in the way our children are being educated in all aspects, whether
Right.
at home or at school or just as a community as a whole. And just like based on everything we discussed, and there were so many ideas, there were so many thought processes. What do you have in mind personally as to, you know, because you've been in the field for 20 years, and what are you looking to implement from your end at a very personal level?
I think I started with creating impact. That was what I started talking about.
Right.
And that is still the foremost in my mind.
Right.
I would want to be in the education space throughout my life. I also want to do things that create and bring communities together. I think one of my missions in life would be personally to bridge the gap between what is happening inside of a school to the current world outside of it, wherein I envision a school ecosystem where beside subject teachers, beside content experts, professionals come and mentor. It could be a lab framework. It could be any framework of choice. It could be a club framework. It could be ongoing project framework. There are many frameworks that are possible. So I'm a firm believer in creating structures and framework that would help nourish the school community. Now, when I say the school community, I'm talking about students, I'm talking about teachers, and I'm talking about parents. All three sectors need education and input, not just in terms of what they have learned over the years, but for them to learn ahead and stay abreast in the next 20 years of how the world is going to change. I think one of my personal missions would be to work with schools to ensure that these thought processes that we discussed today are given space.
And it's not very hypothetical, right?
It's not. It can happen. Small structures and small frameworks can happen, community engagements can happen, consistent follow-up besides academic rigor and learning, which is the stable core of a school, and that should remain. But beyond that, explorations of the community around it can happen. So I believe that I would want to work in an ecosystem where school-to-school transfer of knowledge should happen. There was a very interesting project that this brings to my mind. We started a project in a school that I was working with previously, where teacher-to-teacher collaboration started happening, where students discussed lessons, and we took the urban setting and the rural setting into account. So a privileged school from the city collaborated with a school from a rural setting in Pokhara, and we started student and teacher exchange digitally. This happened before COVID, and it was one of a passion project that has kind of still maintained, balance between what learning can and should become.
Right.
So when we talk about ecosystems developing, I think I would want to work passionately in a framework where schools coexist. They are not just competitive. They collaborate and grow with each other. They support each other in their learning because all schools have their unique strengths, and every educator or every ecosystem can learn from the other.
Right.
And impacting the lives of students, of parents and teachers by exposing them with sector experts. One of my greater appeals has been for sector experts to not just invest in higher education. When I say investing, I'm not talking about money, but their time, effort, and energy should be invested in the school ecosystem so that teachers, current teachers and current school ecosystems and students can learn from them, learn beyond the scope of the subject that they are learning. And if that richness can be embedded into the learning ecosystem, schools would become wonderful, wonderful ecosystems
And
where
that's
learning thrives.
Yeah, and that's a huge responsibility that all of us have, right? Like
Right.
even as sector experts and
Right.
industries,
Right.
because we're literally giving that education to the next society to come.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We are all saying that we want leaders.
Yeah.
We are all saying that we want good communicators. But when it comes to a school ecosystem, we largely remain closed to collaborations.
Right.
So if time can be etched out for in-school content, core subject teaching, plus ecosystem development where subject experts and industry experts are brought in, where projects, lab frameworks, and projects can be designed so that students are growing beyond their core subject learning or the application of the core subject learning into different projects, I think schools would blossom in a very, very different manner. And that's where, that's a favorite spot that I would want to see myself in.
And that is so amazing. The conversations have been so inspiring. I mean, even though I've had so many different conversations with you and at so many, different times, but everything that we discussed today, I believe it's invaluable, and I am inspired at another level right now.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure always to talk to you and to learn, because you are doing amazing work with the early years and their parents. And I think that's the foundation. That's where parents need to be most aware. And if that foundation is set strong, I think the partnership with you and the entire scholastic ecosystem or the school ecosystem in Kathmandu, through your organization and through even you as an individual, as a parenting expert, I think there are boundless opportunities that we can explore.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those words, Niladri. And thank you so much for being here, giving us your time.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. I look forward to everything that, you and I will create in the education system.
Absolutely.
I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Presented by Vyasa Media Network.